Hello everyone, welcome back, and today we're going to finish part 2 of The Cult of Cthulhu. I've never actually read any of these other tales, so that might be something that I can do after this. There's a ton of books that I would love to read. I have to make sure they're like public domain though, so that just kind of narrows my choices a little bit, but this is a really good one. So let's continue with part 2 of The Cult of Cthulhu by H.P. Lovecraft. So, quick recap. They're talking about Inspector Legrassi, I think is actually how you say his name. And he went to a conference. I think it was an archaeology conference, which is funny because I've been to like so many of those. And he was showing this bas relief to them. And an archaeologist came up and said, "Oh, I've seen something like this before," and they compared the chant, and it was like the same. And then the inspector was describing the ritual that was being done that he found in the middle of the swamp in New Orleans, which I didn't remember this part, but it's really interesting. It's starting to get exciting. And we're still talking about that. They were questioning the prisoners that they had arrested there, and they were talking about how, what the chant means. So we're still kind of talking about that. Okay, let's continue. Only 2 of the prisoners were found sane enough to be hanged, and the rest were committed to various institutions. All denied a part in the ritual murders, and averred that killing people had been done by black-winged ones, which had come to them from their immemorial meeting place in the haunted wood. But of those mysterious allies no coherent account could ever be gained. What the police did extract came mainly from an immensely aged mestizo named Castro, who claimed to have sailed to strange ports and talked with undying leaders of the cult of the mountains in China. Old Castro remembered bits of hideous legend that paled the speculations of theosophists and made man and the world seem recent and transient indeed. There had been eons where other things ruled the earth, and they had had great cities. Remains of them, he said the deathless Chinamen had told him, were still to be found as cyclopean stones on islands in the Pacific. They all died vast epochs of time before man came, but there were still arts which could revive them when the stars had come round again to the right positions in the cycle of eternity. They had indeed come themselves from the stars and brought their images with them. These great old ones, Castro continued, were not composed altogether of flesh and blood. They had shape, for did not this star-fashioned image prove it? But that shape was not made of matter. When the stars were right, they could plunge from world to world through the sky. But when the stars were wrong, they could not live. But although they no longer lived, they would never really die. They all lay in stone houses in their great city of Relay, preserved by the spells of mighty Cthulhu, for a glorious resurrection when the stars and the earth might once more be ready for them. But at that time some force from outside must serve to liberate their bodies. The spells that preserved them intact likewise prevented them from making an initial move, and they could only lie awake in the dark and think whilst uncounted millions of years rolled by. They knew all that was occurring in the universe, but their mode of speech was transmitted thought. Even now they talked in their tombs. When their When their infinities of chaos, the first men came, the great old ones spoke to the sensitive among them by molding their dreams, for only thus could their language reach the fleshly minds of mammals. Oh, so cool. Then, whispered Castro, those first men formed the cult around small idols which the great ones shewed them, idols brought in dim eras from dark stars. That cult would never die till the stars came right again, and the secret priests would take the great Cthulhu from his tomb to revive his subjects and resume his rule of earth. The time would be easy to know, for then mankind would have become as the great old ones, free and wild and beyond good and evil, with laws and morals thrown aside, and all men shouting and killing and reveling in joy. Then the liberated old ones would teach them new ways to shout and kill and revel and enjoy themselves, and all the earth would flame with a holocaust of ecstasy and freedom. Meanwhile, the cult, by appropriate rites, must keep alive the memory of those ancient ways and shadow forth the prophecy of their return. In elder time, chosen men had talked with the entombed old ones in dreams, but then something happened. The great stone city of Relay, with its monoliths and sculptures, sepulchres, had sunk beneath the waves, and the deep waters, full of the one primal mystery through which not even thought can pass, had cut off the spectral intercourse. But memory never died, and high priests said that the city would rise again when the stars were right. Then came out of this earth the black spirits of earth, moldy and shadowy and full of dim rumors, picked up in caverns beneath forgotten sea bottoms. But of them old Castro dared not speak much. He cut himself off hurriedly, and no amount of persuasion or subtlety could elicit more in this direction. The size of the old ones, too, he curiously declined to mention. Of the cult, he said that he had thought the center lay amid the pathless deserts of Arabia, where Iram, the city of pillars, dreams unknown beyond its members. No book had ever really hinted of it, though the deathless Chinaman had said there were doubled meanings in the Necronomicon of the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred, which the initiated might read as they chose, especially the much-discussed couplet, "That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange aeons even death may die." Ooh. Legrassi, deeply impressed and not a little bewildered, had inquired in vain concerning the historic affiliations of the cult. Castro apparently had told the truth when he said that it was a holy secret. The authorities at Tulane University could shed no light upon either cult or image, and now the detective had come to the highest authorities in the country and met with no more than the Greenland tale of Professor Webb. The feverish interest aroused at the meeting by Legrassi's tale, corroborated as it was by the statuette, is echoed in the subsequent correspondence of those who attended, although scant mention occurs in the formal publications of the society. Caution is the first care of those accustomed to face occasional charlatanry and imposture. Legrassi for some time lent the image to Professor Webb, but at the latter's death it was returned to him and it remains in his possession, where I viewed it not long ago. It is truly a terrible thing, and unmistakably akin to the dream sculpture of young Wilcox. That my uncle was excited by the tale of the sculpture, I did not wonder, for what thoughts must arise upon hearing, after a knowledge of what Legrassi had learned of the cult, of a sensitive young man who had dreamed not only the figure and exact hieroglyphics of the swamp-found image and the Greenland devil tablet, but had come in his dreams upon at least 3 of the precise words of the formula uttered alike by Esquimaux, Diabolus, and mongrel Louisianans. Professor Engel's instant start on an investigation of the utmost thoroughness was eminently natural, though privately I suspected young Wilcox of having heard of the cult in some indirect way, and of having invented a series of dreams to heighten and continue the mystery at my uncle's expense. The dream narratives and cuttings collected by the professor were, of course, strong corroboration, but the rationalism of my mind and the extravagance of the whole subject led me to adopt what I thought was the most sensible conclusions. So, after thoroughly studying the manuscript again and correlating the theophysical and anthropological notes with the cult narrative of Legrassi, I made a trip to Providence to see the sculptor and give him the rebuke I thought proper for so boldly imposing upon a learned and aged man. Wilcox still lived alone in the Fleur-de-Lis building in Thomas Street, a hideous Victorian imitation of 17th century Breton architecture which flaunts its stuccoed front amidst the lovely colonial houses on the ancient hill, and under the very shadow of the finest Georgian steeple in America. I found him at work in his rooms, and at once conceded from the specimens scattered about that his genius is indeed profound and authentic. He will, I believe, sometime be heard from as one of the greatest descendants, for he has crystallized in clay and will one day mirror in marble those nightmares and fantasies which Arthur McKean evokes in prose and Clark Ashton Smith makes visible in verse and in painting. Dark, frail, and somewhat unkempt in aspect, he turned languidly at my knock and asked me my business without rising. When I told him who I was, he displayed some interest, for my uncle had excited his curiosity in probing his strange dreams, yet had never explained the reason for the study. I did not enlarge his knowledge in this regard, but sought with some subtlety to draw him out. In a short time I became convinced of his absolute sincerity, for he spoke of the dreams in a manner none could mistake. They and their subconscious residuum had influenced his art profoundly, and he shewed me a morbid statue whose contours almost made me shake with the potency of its black suggestion. He could not recall having seen the original of this thing except in his own dream bas-relief, but the outlines had formed themselves insensibly under his hands. It was, no doubt, the giant shape he had raved of in delirium. That he really knew nothing of the hidden cult, save from what my uncle's relentless catechism had left fall, he soon made it clear, and again I strove to think of some way in which he could possibly have received the weird impressions. He talked of his dreams in a strangely poetic fashion, making me see with terrible vividness the damp cyclopean city of slimy green stone, whose geometry, he oddly said, was all wrong. And hear with frightened expectancy the ceaseless half-mental calling from the underground, Cthulhu Fhtagn, Cthulhu Fhtagn, Cthulhu Fhtagn. These words had formed part of the dread ritual which told of dead Cthulhu's dream vigil in his stone vault in Relay, and I felt deeply moved despite my rational beliefs. Wilcox, I was sure, had heard of this cult in some casual way, and had soon forgotten it amidst the mass of his equally weird reading and imagining. Later, by virtue of its sheer impressiveness, it had found subconscious expression in dreams, in the bas-relief, and in the terrible statue I now beheld, so that his imposture upon my uncle had been a very innocent one. The youth was of a type, at once slightly affected and slightly ill-mannered, which I could never like, but I was willing enough now to admit both his genius and his honesty. I took leave of him amicably, and wished him all the success his talent promises. The matter of the cult still remained fascinating to me, and at times I had visions of personal fame from researches into its origin and connections. I visited New Orleans, talked with Legrassi and others of that old-time raiding party, saw the frightful image, and even questioned such of the mongrel prisoners as still survived. Old Castro, unfortunately, had been dead for some years. What I now heard so graphically at first hand, though it was really no more than a detailed confirmation of what my uncle had written, excited me afresh, for I felt sure that I was on the right track of a very real, very secret, and very ancient religion whose discovery would make me an anthropologist of note. My attitude was still one of absolute materialism, as I wish it still were, and I discounted with almost inexplicable perversity the coincidence of the dream notes and odd cuttings collected by Professor Engel. One thing I began to suspect, and which I now fear I know, is that my uncle's death was far from natural. He fell on a narrow hill street leading up from an ancient waterfront swarming with foreign mongrels. After a careless push from a black sailor, I did not forget the mixed blood and marine pursuits of the cult members in Louisiana, and would not be surprised to learn of secret methods of poison needles as ruthless and as anciently known as the cryptic rites and beliefs. Legrassi and his men, it is true, have been let alone, but in Norway a certain seaman who saw things is dead. Might not the deeper inquiries of my uncle after encountering the sculptor's data have come to sinister ears? I think Professor Engel died because he knew too much, or because he was likely to learn too much. Whether I shall go as he did remains to be seen, for I have learned much now. So that's the end of part 2. Part 3 looks pretty long, so I might cut it into 2. So I hope you enjoyed this reading today. It's been a while since I've read this, and it's getting pretty exciting. I remember why I like it so much, because I have a thing for weird, eerie, unspeakable horrors. There's just something about an unscalable, unfathomable horror of a creature that intrigues me. I hope that you guys really enjoyed this video, and I can't wait to start part 3 next time. So hopefully I'll see you then.